My name is Matty Libatique, ASC, and you are listening to the Cinematography Podcast, the one and only.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Good evening, Ilya. I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Just fine and dandy.
Don't you lie to me.
I'm excited for today's episode because it's Matty Libatique Part 2. This is the second part of the two-part interview with Matty Libatique, and it's really great. I'm really glad that here it is. Finally, we're getting to it.
And can I say that if it were up to me, we'd have Libatique Week, and it would be, 7 days of Libatique. I feel like he's one of those people who just, he has amazing stories. He's really in touch with like where his creative inspirations come from and why he does what he does. And he's one of those people I hang on every word. So it's so exciting to get to talk to him. I know I kind of waxed his car on the last time around, but totally everything about Matty Libatique, he's one of the greats, and I feel like we're only just beginning to see what he's capable of, because he just does, every time he does a new thing, it just blows my mind.
Okay, well, we kind of have a breaking news story here for our close focus. If you can imagine the teletype wire sound in the background. Exactly. Only people of a certain generation will.
Maybe Ben Katz can throw in some, or like when I was a kid, it was like a typewriter sound.
Typewriter
like a
sound.
Fake newsroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If Ben Katz doesn't have that, you can just have my poor impersonations roll there. Yes. So yeah, breaking news, and the sound effects.
Breaking, terrible, sad, horrible news. And I know that this is a little LA centric, but I do believe it impacts more than just California, but it's Pacific Theaters and ArcLight Cinemas.
Which for those outside of Los Angeles or outside of a place where there is an ArcLight, is sort of like the preeminent top dog movie palace. It is like, the super premium experience. You pay a little bit extra, but you're going to get a great seat. You're not going to have more than 3 commercials. You're going to have a personal
There are
introduction.
no commercials at the ArcLight.
Sorry.
Zero.
Not more than 3
commercials.
Well, that's not true. Oh. That's not true. There's no commercials for non-movies, but you only get a maximum of 3 trailers. You don't get 30 minutes of trailers and 10 minutes of commercials. No, they don't do any of that. You get 3 trailers, you get the movie, boom, that's it.
Also, and if you did live in LA, firstly, ArcLight completely renovated the historic Cinerama Dome, which is one of the most beautiful movie theaters in the world. If you're unfamiliar with the Cinerama Dome, look it up. You've probably seen it in stuff. It's a giant geodesic dome that's a beautiful movie theater. When I first moved to LA in 1999, the Cinerama Dome was kind of run down. The picture and sound quality were still good, but like the seats were kind of tired and the curtains and stuff were kind of old and gross. And I distinctly remember going to see, a friend of mine invited me to see Ben-Hur, a movie I'd never seen before. And it's so long that I think I might still be watching it right now. And unbeknownst to me, that was the last show at the Cinerama Dome before they closed down to renovate it and turn it into the ArcLight. And the ArcLight Hollywood became the destination for movie premieres and Q&As with big name directors. Our friend of the show, Janelle Riley, and one of my best friends, she runs Q&As with humongous directors, actors, writers, DPs, sometimes sound designers, and they would often do those at the ArcLight Hollywood. There's an ArcLight not too far from me, and called the ArcLight Sherman Oaks, and they have a bunch of them all over California. But a friend of mine in Boston said that they just opened up an ArcLight in Boston right before COVID hit, and he was Scott Schmidt, and he was like, "What's going to happen to it?" And I'm like, "I'm presuming it's gone. Like all the other ArcLight theaters, they're just gone."
The entire chain, and this has got ramifications for people outside of Los Angeles, of course, as well. Some states have already lifted restrictions and things are open and people are back at it, but movie theaters in a lot of places are not that way, and your local movie theater might be having a really hard time. So perhaps when it is time to reopen, it wouldn't be a bad place to spend some money. Interesting, the Vitec chain, well, it's not a chain, the Vitec video store has moved across Los Angeles to a new location, and they're opening a theater as part of this video store, as part of like this overall experience that they're going to do. It was supposed to open last year, but COVID happened. It still hasn't opened. The whole reason they exist, though, right now is because a wealthy benefactor basically got involved and saved them from ruin. I don't know if that can happen with the Pacific Theater chain and the ArcLight, maybe one of the locations.
It's an enormous theater chain. It's, dozens, if not hundreds of theaters.
For someone to step in to say like, oh, well, I'm going to just make this my pet cause, that's a major to-do. So I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed going to the theater. I don't know what the future holds, but it may be a lot harder to do it coming up here in the near future.
Well, my hope is that I'm pretty sure the Cinerama Dome is a historical landmark. I don't think that it's going to get demolished or turned into a swap meet or something.
You wait.
God, I hope not.
Happened downtown, all those other theaters.
I'm hoping that somebody keeps it alive as a movie theater. I almost think the Cinerama Dome would be better like the New Beverly Cinema, where they they show revivals and old stuff. And they sometimes did that. I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey there. I saw Citizen Kane there. They would show older movies at the Cinerama Dome, and it was an amazing place to see those movies. As for all the other ones, I know that the ArcLight Sherman Oaks, before it was an ArcLight, it was actually a Pacific Theaters, and it was just a regular old, normal movie theater. And my guess is probably a lot of those spaces, if the movie business ticks up, which based on the Godzilla versus Kong numbers, to me, it sounds like the theatrical business is still alive. There's still people still want to go see movies in theaters. And I think that a lot of us have been hungering for a year to see movies in the theater. So as soon as it's really safe, I think, it's not going to be a fire sale, but maybe some other theaters or independent cinemas can move into some of those spaces and start doing the movie thing again. Also, I wouldn't be surprised to see a big chain like AMC or something like that maybe step into a lot of those spaces, because some of them, like for instance, the ArcLight Sherman Oaks, it's in an amazing area and there's nothing like it around. I will say, though, that although ArcLight set a standard for premium cinema experience at the time, I would argue that Alamo Drafthouse has exceeded that. And Alamo is, in my opinion, the best place to see a movie. It's just that there's only, like in LA, there's only one Alamo, and it's in downtown LA. So for me, it's a big to-do to get there and see a movie there.
It's also not the largest screens. I mean, and that's not their business model. Their business model is like, premium experience and food products and other things like that. When you go to the ArcLight, you got half a dozen screens over 500 seats. I mean, it's like you got big rooms.
That's true. The screens, I've only seen a couple of things at the Alamo in LA. I will say that I've like Fantastic Fest is at the Alamo in Austin, and those screens are pretty big. Those are, I'd say, at least normal size screens. The ArcLight did have excessively large, beautiful screens. And one thing that the ArcLight had that I thought was genius too was that they don't have the seats going right up to the screen. They usually had, probably like 20 feet back for the very first row. And so I remember going to see, for instance, Pan's Labyrinth. I saw Pan's Labyrinth. I was doing a story about Guillermo del Toro for Creative Screenwriting magazine. I didn't know anything about Pan's Labyrinth, and I showed up like 15 minutes before the screening, and the place was packed. It was a film festival that it was playing at. The movie hadn't come out yet.
You sat in the front
row. The only seat left was front row center, and that movie blew my mind. It's that movie is pure power of cinema. It's such a great movie. And ordinarily, if you were sitting front row center, that would be you'd be cross-eyed by the time you walked out of there. But the ArcLight was designed with the idea that every seat should be a pretty good seat.
Yeah, and they pulled it off. So we're going to mourn the loss of Pacific / ArcLight. We don't know what's really going to happen. It's we'll wait and see. It was just really like, breaking news just this evening. So hopefully...
Yeah. Right before we hopped on here. So there's a Hollywood Reporter and a Variety article about it, and that's all I was able to find so far.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. We'll let you know what happens. But let's get to the interview. Let's get to...
let's do it.
Let's get to part 2 with Matty Libatique.
Here he is.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
Awesome. So, well, we had left off talking about Tigerland, and I think by the time Tigerland came out, you were already sort of, there are certain cinematographers, I'll go see a movie, no matter whether I'm interested in the movie, no matter what I think of the director or the cast or whatever, I'll go see their work. And I remember seeking out Tigerland because you shot it. And I was obviously very familiar with Joel Schumacher's work and was a huge fan of some of it, not as much of a fan of some others. But when I saw that you were working with him, I was like, I want to know what alchemy comes out of that. And also, like, I'd never heard of Colin Farrell. It's the first movie I ever saw him in. Can you talk about like how you went about connecting to him? Because I think of him at that point, he'd been making movies since like 1972. He's a pretty established filmmaker, and you were definitely a cinematographer on the rise, but he was probably one of the first A-list, top of the line, very established directors to bring you on board. How did it happen?
It happened through a connection through, oddly, Requiem for a Dream. One of the producers, Bo Flynn, an old friend of ours, was attached to Tigerland and the screenplay. And I remember it was back in the day where we had pagers.
I remember.
And I basically got on a plane. I got a page, called it back. It was Bo saying that he had the script that he wanted me to read, and it was Tigerland, and he told me it was like this Vietnam, kind of a Vietnam story. I wasn't actually that interested, really. It didn't sound like something I wanted to do. I get off the plane, and I have another page, and I call back, and it's Bo. He's like, I call him back, and he's like, did I tell you that it was Joel Schumacher directing the film?
Oh, wow.
And I said, no, you didn't. That's pretty important information. And you can imagine, I'm like, I'm still in my 20s at that point,
Yeah.
And I'm kind of blown away that a person like Joel Schumacher wants to work with me on just on the power of pi. And
was that what got him excited about working with you?
That was it. And Requiem hadn't come out yet. I had shot it, but it hadn't come out yet. And I shot Tigerland and Josie and the Pussycats within 1 calendar year.
Wow.
I was just, I couldn't believe that this black and white reversal movie had enough of an impact to make people think that I could shoot Josie and the Pussycats or maybe Tigerland, yes, but it was quite incredible. It was a very special time. But Tigerland was one of those things where Joel. The great thing about Joel is that he's open to collaboration. He was, I'm sorry. And he was one for bold moves, everything. Like he had just gotten off of a film Flawless. That was really well done. Declan Quinn did a great job shooting it. And it was sort of a return to his pre-Batman times.
Yeah. And
that's kind of where I found him, 30 years difference in age between he and I. And I remember getting a 16 millimeter projector, and we shot a test, and I was screening him on my wall in my apartment outside of Jacksonville, and me and the gaffer stringing it up. And I invited Joel to, hey, Joel, I'm screening the test in my place, and he just turned around and he's like, you're 30 years younger than me. And then walked away. I took that as a no.
And, that movie has, like, I feel like, again, for, Joel Schumacher, and I think it's bringing up kind of the context of his career and how he'd made the 2 Batman movies, which were, they were the biggest budget movies of their time, probably. And then, of course, Flawless, which was a smaller movie. But this was, like, for Joel Schumacher, this was like a kind of grungy, down and dirty kind of movie, right?
Oh, absolutely. And he loved it. It was a newcomer like Colin Farrell, who right off the bat had just screen presence.
Within a year, he was in everything. I remember, I had never heard of him. I saw Tigerland, and then, like, a year later, he was in, like, Minority Report, and he was in all kinds of stuff.
And, I rewatched Tigerland not 4 months ago, and you have to give the guy credit. His American accent was pretty damn good. I don't know what state the guy's from, but he pulled it off and he has a very thick Irish accent, And he was a new actor. He was barely, I think he might have been 22 at the time, He was a very young actor, but he knew the camera, and he knew, like, he was so aware. Like, you could see this guy was going to be a star, right? It was incredible. But Joel, for me, it's like, take chances. He wanted to shoot in 16. He referenced Leaving Las Vegas, which was a great film. Again, Declan Quinn. And they were, he said, let's shoot Super 16. I opted to shoot regular 16, and the studio was sort of up in arms, like, why shoot regular 16 when people are shooting super 16?
I mean, the word super is right in the name of the format, so, you know.
Yeah. My thing was, like, based on conversations with Joel, is we wanted to maximize the grain, not minimize the grain.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want more negative area, I want less. And I wanted to blow up to a 1.85 image. And I thought, okay, let's degrade as much as we possibly could. I knew that the style of shooting would be, you know, we shot the whole movie on like 2 zooms, an 8-64 and an 11-138, you know, and I had an operator and I operated handheld all the way. And it was back in the time when I was extremely aggressive, and I shot 72-48, regular 16, and I pushed it 2 stops. And then I had the stupid idea of trying to cross-process stuff at the end and bleach bypass it at the same time. And I was using a very small lab in LA called Crest, and I had this amazing...
I remember Crest.
Ivo Stanoff was my timer, and Ivo's a great guy, fucking advocate for cinematography, and you know, he was super supportive, and he helped me out. Like, I actually look back on the times of film, and I remember that relationship between my timer and myself, and that would be the guide on how I would expose things. And, you know, that the time's gone. It's past now, but it was when I think back on Tigerland, it was really about, okay, well, I'm overexposing or I'm underexposing something. And knowing that only because I've had this relationship with a timer, that's just invaluable, you know? And I was just trying so many things.
Was there any pushback, like from the studio level or the financiers, about doing stuff like, you know, cross-processing or bleach bypass, which, you know, are risky, and, you know, you can't bring the negative back if they don't like the way it looks? Was there any pushback?
Well, I had come out of the Darren Aronofsky world, so I didn't really think about what other people thought as much as what the filmmakers thought, you know? That was kind of a philosophy I had, and it didn't, you know, I was too young for it to dawn on me that somebody might object to what we were doing. But I was called to, this is an interesting story, I was called to the studio. Somebody in the post-production department at Fox called me in for a meeting, and they wanted to discuss why I wanted to shoot regular 16 instead of Super 16. And there was a reference, a film reference that I used with Joel, called a film by Frederick Wiseman called Titicut Follies.
Frederick is on our show this week. We just dropped his episode.
Oh, no!
He's one of my favorites. I'm a huge slobbering fanboy for Frederick Wiseman.
Are you fucking serious?
I'm dead serious. It was one of the most exciting interviews I ever got to do, and he could kick all of our asses. By the way,
holy shit, that's incredible. Anyway, he's like Frederick Wiseman. Ballet was a huge reference when we did Pi. Titicut Follies. There was the scene in Requiem where we're getting the hose stuck up. That was Titicut Follies
for sure.
And then when I thought about Tigerland, I said, Joel, watch this film. And Joel watched it, it's like, I want this. And regular 16 millimeter, I was so steadfast in sort of my belief that this is the way to go. I didn't want to do, leaving Las Vegas or shot Super 16 because it wanted to look more like 35. I wanted to look like 16, you know. So I was called into an office, had this meeting, whatever, explained myself. And they're writing down Titicut Follies. I remember I said, well, here's one of our Reverend Titicut Follies. And I say, how do you spell that? And they're writing down Titicut Follies. I'm just like, what the fuck is this? A couple days later, I go to Joel's house and we're prepping, and I'm meeting him in his dope ass house in Bel Air. And I tell him, it's like, Joel, you should know that they brought me into the studio the other day to ask me about the look of the movie. And his head exploded. He literally called the head of the studio immediately, and I'm sitting there in this room while Joel Schumacher is like, how dare you bring my cinematographer in to a meeting without me knowing? I was like, oh, this is some old Hollywood shit right here. Right? And I'm like 29.
Wow.
So I learned a lot from Joel on that one. And another thing I learned from him is that he would just, we'd work out a scene, we'd rehearse it, and then he would be like, you know what, this dialogue is just bullshit. And he'd just cross it out, take the page out, and throw it out of his script. I'd never seen that before. And Joel was, I can't say enough about him. He gets disparaged so much about some of the films he's done, but as a person and as a filmmaker, I have the utmost respect for him, and God rest his soul, because he was a special human being that nobody can replace, and like nobody is going to be like again.
Well, and the thing is, I do think he gets a lot of shit for certain movies, but also like some of his movies are huge classics. And I always feel like it doesn't matter who you are, if you're the Coen brothers or whatever, you're David Fincher, not every movie you're going to make is going to resonate in the exact same way for the exact same audience. And probably if you have a long enough filmography, you're going to have some duds. But and the stuff you did with Joel Schumacher, I think Tigerland was amazing. I think Phone Booth was amazing. Obviously, he made stuff like Lost Boys. Those movies are still referenced today. And most movies they hit the screens and they go away and people don't think about them. And he made movies that really stuck in the world for a long time, which I think is impressive.
I agree. And he suffered from a snobbery in cinema that exists, about like having a perfect record or art for art's sake. He wasn't a filmmaker in that sense. He was a pop cultural sponge and icon. He didn't make movies for the same reason other people made movies. So it's like he wasn't doing it for his name. It's almost like Joel was doing it to do something. You know what I mean? It was a different thing for Joel. Like he came from a place that people didn't understand when I worked with him. He was sort of not a cast-off, but a byproduct of the late 60s, Woody Allen being a costume designer, and the early 70s, and then the mid-70s writing Car Wash. He was a byproduct of a time into another time, into the 80s, which was completely fucking insane. And then his career lasted all the way through the 90s. Into the 2000s. So
yeah, I mean, he was
say what you want about the guy. Yeah. There's not one bad thing you can say to me that I'll agree with.
So, I mean, again, I feel like we could spend, hours and hours talking about individual movies, but I want to definitely jump next kind of to Spike Lee and your working relationship with Spike Lee, which obviously before we started the interview, I didn't know that Do the Right Thing was kind of a giant inspiration for you, but you worked with Spike Lee several times, and I would cite Inside Man as possibly my favorite Spike Lee movie. I think he's made a lot of great movies, but I love a good heist movie, and it's just one of the most brilliant ones. But, talk about, if you could, just, working with Spike Lee, because he also is, he's a larger-than-life personality, and he makes bold movies.
It's a different ecosystem, when you work with him. I mean, sometimes what was amazing to me is being on set with him is that the people around us, some of the people had been there since She's Gotta Have It.
Oh, wow.
Or Do the Right Thing, or Malcolm X. So you have this history around him of people who understand him, that is, and people who have faith in him and believe in him as a brother. Not just as a filmmaker or a boss. There's a love and an admiration for him that I don't think I've seen with anybody else. It exists outside the regular business of making a movie.
He's like the only filmmaker who has his own name for what his films are. Like, they're not films. It's a Spike Lee joint on each one.
It's a Spike Lee joint. Nobody can dare to adopt the moniker of a joint.
Yeah, it would be fun to come up with, every filmmaker who gets that, like, Murder of Crows kind of thing, like, Pride of Lions, so it's a Spike Lee joint, but what's a Christopher Nolan movie? But, anyway, I digress.
Just huge.
A Christopher Nolan gargantuan.
Yeah, exactly. I think, working with Spike is he never ceases to amaze me. He'll turn what you would think would be a single camera scene into a 3-camera scene, and he'll turn a 3-camera scene into one shot. Because he just thinks a certain way. I have a napkin somewhere in my box of curiosities that is a shot list that he gave me one day, where it was literally a napkin where because he shows. Here's the thing about Spike, and I've heard this about Steven Spielberg too. They show up first. If call time is 6:30, they're there at 5:30 or 6. Yeah. And Spike is the same way, and he shows up and. I'll show up to a set and he'll hand me a napkin or a piece of paper with the shots that he wants that day. And he's got a youthfulness to him, and also a real knowledge of film history, especially American film history. You remember in The Searchers, how that, Spike Lee telling me about a shot in The Searchers is kind of insane. Or, have you seen Frankenheimer's Seconds? Have you seen, he just has an encyclopedia mind of American cinema that is incredible. It's like, you ever see anything by Otto Preminger? you know. And when we did Inside Man, it was interesting. We watched a bunch of films. We watched like Thomas Crown Affair, the original.
That's a great film, yeah.
We screened them at the screening room in Tribeca, and he would get prints out of the Scorsese library, and we'd screen prints, and like whoever wanted to show up. Usually it was a bunch of PAs, office people. The crew never showed up. You know, it was me, Spike, and Spike would talk over the whole movie, just like, "What about that? That," and he'd point to the screen. Things we wanted to do, things he thought were good references for what we were doing. And I think that flavor comes out in Inside Man. It's kind of an old school heist movie in that way. And it comes from his absolute knowledge of where to reference certain things. You know, the guy who delivers pizzas in Inside Man is the same guy who delivers pizzas in Dog Day Afternoon.
Oh, really?
The guy's dressed up as a cop, and he even says, "I'm going to keep the change." He says the same thing in Dog Day Afternoon.
Oh my God, I've never caught that, and I've seen both movies like 100 times.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And Dog Day was something we watched on print, you know.
Wow. So did you ever tell Spike Lee that he was one of your main inspirations at the beginning?
When I first met him, no, that would have been too weird, you know?
Yeah.
What was odd was, like, I had come off the fountain, and I did a article for the New York Times. And I said that, you know, my main inspiration was Do the Right Thing. And the first day on Inside Man, the very first day, my camera operator, Steve Constantino, hands me a newspaper, and he shows it to me. And Spike comes up to me, and he's just like, "Thank you." And that was just like, I couldn't believe it. And he was referencing the fact that I referenced him in that article as being a hero. But we had made a film together before that, and I never really mentioned it. Because it's like, you have to watch out. You're working with a hero. You have to be a collaborator. You have to be present as a fellow filmmaker. You can't, you know, you're not a fanboy, you know. Especially if you're a DP, you know what I mean? You can't go in with a fanboy attitude. So the first time I worked with him, it was like resisting that at all costs and trying to be as professional as possible. But I knew, even the first time I met him, we talked about the New York Knicks, because we're both from New York and we're both huge fans. And I know he's a super fan. I'm like, as a Knicks fan, I was like, I'm talking to the number one Knicks fan. Like, that's basically how our conversation went the first time we met. But did I tell him that Do the Right Thing is the reason why I got into the cinema? No, that would have been completely inappropriate for the first meeting.
No, it might be weird, but yeah, I mean, I'm glad that he got to know that while you were working with him, though, because he's such an icon, and I'm sure that a lot of people have been inspired by him over the years. But you know, few people get to like be inspired by somebody and then like work side by side with them like that.
I mean, it was. I did a film with Ernest Dickerson called Never Die Alone, and I had the same feeling. You know, he couldn't have made me feel more comfortable, Ernest. You know, as just being a cinematographer, working for another cinematographer, he was so understanding of it, and like he understood the gravity of like a young guy who was inspired by him working for him, and because I had been through that experience, I didn't want Spike to actually feel that. You know, feel that kind of fandom.
Well, speaking about the Ernest Dickerson thing, I always wonder about cinematographers working for other cinematographers when they become directors. And, you know, I mean, you said that Ernest Dickerson was pretty cool, but I always wonder if it seems to me, because we've talked to a number of them who've done that, it's like, oh, okay, the pressure's off. I don't have to be thinking about, you know, every little tiny detail of the cinematography, and I can focus on the performances. But I'm always wondering if they're like, could you move the camera up half an inch? Can you know, like, is there any degree of micromanagement at that level? I shouldn't say micromanagement, but very, very specific direction, like trying to get you to do it the way they would do it.
No, I didn't get that from Ernest, but the one thing I learned from Ernest is that there's always a way, you know? Like, you plan and things don't work out, which is cinema, which is filmmaking in general. But Ernest had this way of just sort of like walking to the left 5 steps, walking to the right 5 steps, and then just say, you know what? I think it might work from here. And then, like, taking me out of my head where I was fixated on what we were trying to do and that it wasn't working out, and then finding a way to work it out. If something's not given to you and it's not working out, you could find a way, as long as you keep your head in the game in terms of being a creative, not a facilitator. It was very wise what he taught me, and I'm very appreciative of it. It's weird to have worked with both of them. You know what I mean? Because I attribute both of them to the reason why I even do it. But,
yeah. Well, I mean, Do the Right Thing has such an amazing, popping, bright, amazing look. I mean, it's not like anything. I remember seeing that movie in the theater, and I'd never seen anything like that at the time. And that's one of the things we had on the show. We had Ellen Kuras on once, and she was talking about working with him on Summer of Sam and some other stuff. And it must be freeing, but also like he's so experimental with what he does. There's a specific kind of signature shot that Spike Lee does in his films, and I've always kind of wanted to know why it is specifically deployed where it's deployed. And it's when someone's walking, he literally has them on like a dolly with the camera, and they're dollying with them and kind of pantomiming the walk a little bit, but it looks like...
Or not.
Yeah. What is it that motivates him to do that? Because like obviously in Inside Man, there's a million scenes where people are walking, but I can only recall one shot like that. It is a signature thing he's done forever. And I've always wondered, when I'm watching one of his movies and there's a shot like that, I always perk up like, oh, there it is. It's like my old friend. I'm waiting for it. But I don't know what is like powering exactly when he's going to drop it. Like, what is that shot?
There's no real name. We call it the shot. It's like, how come, we did She Hate Me together and we never did it? And I'm like, how come I never got to do the shot? How come I never got to do the shot? And Spike, I still haven't gotten to do the shot. Everybody got to do the shot but me. On Inside Man, we did it with Denzel when he was walking to the front of the bank. He's never explained this, but if you watch all his films, it's a time where you can reflect on what's happened before and what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. It's always come at that point. What's come before and what's about to happen. And there's always a dope ass music cue that happens when that shot is occurring.
Yeah.
So it's going back to that notion that he is not a dogma director. He is taking advantage of cinema in its ultimate form.
Yeah. So, and I know I kind of wanted to go through the big swings of directors that you've worked with, but like it's around the same time as Inside Man was The Fountain. I think they were even maybe the same year. It was like 2006, I want to say. And The Fountain was a movie, if I'm not mistaken, that Darren Aronofsky was trying to get made for like from the beginning. Like that was like a dream project for him. And it had some of the most insane visuals, which if I'm not mistaken, were shot practically using like microscopic. It was some insane process that I've never seen anyone use for like the outer space stuff.
Well, that was all nebula. Everything you see when he's traveling through space in The Fountain, the backgrounds are basically macro photography of chemical reactions. Mm-hmm. And creating cloud formations, and it's about going into the macro to create the largest expanse possible. His writing partner, Ari Handel, he studied neuroscience, and I remember on The Fountain asking him what it would be like, because I was struggling with how to articulate light and modulation in a nebula. Which is like, it sounds stupid, It's like you just make the lights flicker and modulate. But I don't think that way. I want to understand, what can I do to make it as authentic as possible? And he said, I would say, is it like traveling through clouds in a plane? He's like, bigger. What the fuck is that supposed to mean to me? How am I supposed to interpolate bigger? And then I start to think physically. I'm like, well, that must be slower. So the light rig designed and between the macro photography that I saw, which was all shot high speed on film, and the way the light might move when he said bigger, I said, okay, so the movements of light need to be not visible within seconds, but in like tens of seconds. That's the kind of thing. And that, up until now, I think that's still probably the biggest challenge I've ever had, is try to figure out how that spaceship, that sort of bubble, that, not your traditional spaceship. And I still to this day, and unless Jodorowsky did it, I don't know that anybody has traveled through space in a fucking bubble before.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Darren Aronofsky, like we don't have enough filmmakers like him today. his movies are just so unique to him, and they're kind of like interesting art pieces, each one of them so individual, and yet you've shot the majority of them and they have such a coherent kind of thematic through line. Mother, which is possibly the most daring of his films, and I'm glad that someone's able to keep working like that, because I feel like most filmmakers, if they get like a little taste of something, they're given a Jurassic Park movie, and I wonder what movies we would have gotten from them if they weren't like catapulted to the very, very top, or they just don't get those opportunities. Like, it's hard to get those movies made, period, today. I always like to think also David Lynch was up to direct Return of the Jedi, but he turned it down to direct Dune.
But can you imagine if he did?
I would pay so much money to watch his Return of the Jedi.
In this day and age, we could actually speculate what that would have been and do it ourselves.
We should. We should totally make
it. Would be the deepest deep fake ever. We could do it. Like, we have enough people we know.
Let's get on that. I'm in.
Every once in a while, there'll be a chapter heading about the weather.
Yeah,
I want to see Luke go into the Red Room. I want to see. I just feel like that there's
exactly
there's so it would be so.
I want to hear Luke saying suave.
I cannot wait. I'm actually really excited to see the new Dune, but the original Dune, I think, actually gives us a look into that. Anyway, that has nothing to do with what we're here to talk about.
I want to see it because Greg's, I love Greg. He's a badass, and I love his quality of light. So I want to see it for that.
Oh my God. No, that movie is going to be, it's going to be off the hook. The trailer just blew me away. And
I agree. And between Denny and Greg Fraser, I'm in, man.
So as we were talking about people like that not making action movies or Marvel movies, like around that time is 2008, a few years later, you made Iron Man, which in my opinion, kind of reinvented.
Way to throw it back at my face.
That movie, though, is so unexpected and so brilliant. And you had, I believe, not worked with Jon Favreau at that time, had you?
I had not. It's funny. I met him about the year award season at the Independent Spirit Awards. It was when I won for Requiem for a Dream, and I met Jon Favreau, and he's a big dude. He's like, I voted for Tigerland too. I thought you should have been nominated for Tigerland because it was the same year, and that would have been incredible to be nominated for Tigerland and Requiem. But John's like, he looks at me, he's like, how the hell do you do handheld? You're so short. That was basically my interaction with John until I got called into a meeting to meet him for Iron Man 1.
It's weird because I feel like Marvel works best when there are no expectations. So it's things like Iron Man, which it wasn't Spider-Man. It wasn't already a global franchise. That movie made it a global franchise. And of course, I would also say Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a movie that I don't think they even had any expectations from, that ended up being a humongous hit. But that first Iron Man, which I went to see kind of like, hey, I like Robert Downey Jr., I like Jon Favreau. I'm going to go check it out. And it was just like, holy crap, you could see a franchise kind of opening up. Now, it's my understanding that Jon Favreau on that used a lot of improvisation. A, was that true? If it's not true, then I'll drop it. But B, how does working in an improvisational atmosphere kind of affect your work?
Well, I wouldn't call it improvisational as much as it was a fluid screenplay. It's something we worked out every day, and to work in those circumstances, I didn't feel it. I didn't get frustrated by it. I'm like, okay, if you guys want to spend a couple hours in the beginning of the day rehearsing it and trying to rework the words, and we could throw these sides away and get another set of sides in another hour, then so be it. And if our 12-hour day turned into 9 hours of shooting, then so be it. Like, as long as what we were getting, everybody was happy with.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was like a giant independent film, I have to say. Walking into the offices of Iron Man was like, there was enormous resources because I had never done a film of that size. The biggest film I had done of that size was Inside Man. And that was $50 million. And even Spike didn't know what to do. He was just, asking and wondering why nobody's told him that he couldn't have something. A filmmaker is a filmmaker no matter how much money they have. They keep asking and they keep pushing until somebody pushes back because they don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
And on Iron Man, it was the same case. And we had Avi Arad was still involved, mm-hmm. and Kevin Feige was Avi's like secondhand man. Like, Kevin Feige's a legend now. Like,
Yeah.
That was the early days of this juggernaut.
Yeah, I mean, that's the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which might be the most profitable film franchise ever.
Don't blame me.
I have to think that if Iron Man hadn't been what it was, there wouldn't have been a Marvel Cinematic Universe, or it wouldn't have been as big as it has become. And it's almost made so that if you watch Iron Man and then you jump to the end and watch Avengers Endgame, whatever, part 2, they're still one of a piece. Like, they're still kind of referencing each other, and they're building off of the look you created, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I feel like the whole MCU kind of has the vibe of that first Iron Man movie.
Well, I think they had the vibe of the first Iron Man because of Robert Downey Jr. Mm-hmm. Not because of me or John. Maybe John. But not because of me. I don't want to take credit for the things I've seen that happened afterwards in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I always, not to get into a DC versus Marvel thing, but I think it's interesting that Marvel chose to make this kind of airtight, perfect, everything refers to everything else. I say this, I'm not a superhero.
But that's a stroke of genius from Kevin Feige.
Exactly.
And a stroke of genius from everybody involved, that they saw how to, and it's kind of motivated from the man who's, dearly departed, Stan Lee.
Yeah.
He connected the worlds in comics, and he connected all the worlds in comics, and these guys just followed suit and did the right thing. And they created, quote unquote, universe.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That's fucking awesome, It is,
I mean,
applaud them
it's
for
a
that.
humongous undertaking, no matter what. I don't love all the movies or whatever. And I think it's interesting that DC chose kind of to go to the opposite and to have like a Joker movie that has literally no continuity with the Joker movie that came out the year before. And they're just like, screw it.
Well, they're not as connected, and they didn't have the vision that Marvel had.
Yeah.
And you know what? They still make good movies. Don't get me wrong.
No,
I was a DC fan growing up as a kid. As a comic book kid, I loved DC. And I look at Marvel now, I'm like, wow, that's smart.
No,
and
I love them both, and for different reasons. I mean, So let's go ahead and jump a little bit forward to A Star Is Born. We're almost at present time here. So A Star Is Born, you're tackling, I think it's the third or fourth remake of it. Did you refer to the previous versions of that movie when you came on board?
I revisited them, yes. I mean, I had to. And then Bradley, on our first meeting, Bradley and I talked about, like, how much importance there would be to sort of revisiting the previous three,
Yeah.
Obviously, there were parallels to the 70s version with Streisand and Christopherson because of the modernity of it all, But if you look at the Judy Garland version, there was, I think our version is more akin to that one. There's a sort of classical structure to it, although that it had a lot more music than any of them, the Garland version. And before that, the previous version was more classical as well. And it was like, okay, well, we're on stage with a handheld camera. It makes you feel like it's the 70s version, Streisand, Christopherson. But I watched that film, and it was like, it's one of those films I remember from childhood because I remember watching it at a drive-in with my parents.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? And being in the back of a fucking pickup truck with a camper shell, like watching A Star Is Born in New Jersey, We weren't beholden to any of them as much as we were sort of, we wanted to pay homage. Like the scene where he says that line, "I just want to take another look at you." Mm-hmm. Like there was a struggle there whether or not he was going to do that, and he just decided to do it. And I think it resonates, and it's a nice shout out to the history of the franchise, or not franchise, but the lineage of the films, right? It's also like, how does Jack die in comparison to the James Mason character or the Chris Christopherson character? Is it going to be a motorcycle crash, or is it going to be, what is it going to be? Mm-hmm. And as we were making it, it answered itself, like he was going to commit suicide, And then slowly but surely that wasn't something that was written into the script when we started shooting. It was something that evolved.
Oh, really? Well, I mean,
maybe that, I don't know what the party line is. But
no, it's always interesting when you hear about these movies that are like Oscar caliber films, like Gladiator, where they basically had an outline and made the whole movie. And I know that that's not what you're describing here, but to me, it's interesting to hear that because to me, that seems like such an essential part of that story, to not have it at the script level, but to find it while you're working. Maybe that's why it feels so essential, is that it came out of the making of the movie. Were you making the movie in sequence at all, or somewhat in sequence?
Not really in sequence. I mean, we started on stage at Coachella. Like, that's the beginning. We did there's a scene where they do a road stop, and that was the beginning of the movie, right? That was us shooting a day at the beginning of the film. And I'll never forget, Clint Eastwood shows up, and he looks at me and he's like, "What the hell happened to your hair?" I was like, that's the best fucking thing that's ever happened to me in my career. Like, Clint Eastwood just like looking at my hair. He's like, what the fuck's wrong with you? But we started there, but then soon after that, we're in Palm Desert. We're shooting Coachella, and we're shooting all the performances. So we hit the ground running in performance. And then, as time went on, one of the original conceits was that he was going to die in a motorcycle accident, like in the 70s version was Christopherson. But it just started to gestate, and the tone and performances and how their relationship was going and the level of alcoholism and the level, those things started to evolve. And the great thing about being a part of a collaboration where you trust each other, like not just me and a director, but the whole crew being able to pivot, is that's not going to be a problem. If you want to change something in the story, we can do it. From production design to cinematography to producing to, just the general crew. Like, we can pivot and we can make it happen. And it evolved into what you see in the movie is him hanging himself in the garage,
But if you knew that when you were starting, and this is a crazy question, so I fundamentally, you might just shoot me down and say I'm full of shit, but if you knew from the beginning that he was going to kill himself, would you have shot the scenes leading up to it differently than if you thought he was going to die in a motorcycle accident?
In retrospect, no. I don't think you want anybody to know, and you don't want to telegraph. I think the power of the film, like, it's not like we didn't know that was going to happen after week one. Like, week one, we knew that was going to be a change. It wasn't like we improvised it on the day we were supposed to shoot a motorcycle.
Hey, everybody!
But at the same time, it's like you. It's a surprise. It's like, what's this character going through? That's a story you're telling. Anyway, I was going to say about Bradley, like, the one thing he has the ability of is, like, as a director, which is why I started, like, he is a real director, is that his ability to explain what the scene is in his imagination. And that's one thing actors have over directors sometimes, is a way to articulate verbally what is happening. Because, like, and Bradley has that, like, he could tell you that the camera starts high and you see the top of his head and it booms down, or it starts really low and you see his boots come out of the truck and they follow him until they go to his hat that he puts down. All that. Like, when you look at that scene where he committed suicide, that's out of Bradley's imagination, explained to us like a week and a half before we shot it. So he also has this ability that I've never seen before, which he could see the camera out of his peripheral vision and feel comfortable about where it was at a scene, so he didn't have to watch playback.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. I think that there's an interesting thing happening these days where, to me, the cliche used to be actors who become directors. Not all, but a lot of them weren't especially visual. And I think that, like, that movie is amazingly visual, in its construction and the way the sequences and stuff kind of play off of each other. Always interested if that has to do with you or if that has to do with him, or, it's usually the alchemy of the two of you together. But, I feel like him or Jordan Peele, there's like so many actors who've turned director recently, in the last 10 years, who I think are almost primarily visual. Like their visual is amazing. And I love what you're saying about his deconstruction of a scene, because that's what actors, that's all they do. They deconstruct a scene so that they understand emotionally it has to go from here to here to here. So it's an extra step in your brain to go from that to what does that look like? But
I think even more importantly, it's like he knows what's more impactful in terms of performance. Like, sometimes directors will rely editorially on how to construct the tone of a scene based on multiple takes of one actor or multiple actors, right? Mm-hmm. When you deal with an actor as a director, they know when they want a scene to carry out from this point to this point, from a performance standpoint. That's fucking interesting. You know what I mean? So you get a commitment from them, which is unbelievable. Like, they know when they don't want to cut away from a person. They won't walk away from a scene until they get the performance from the beginning to the end of how long they want that performance to last. And I thought that was really interesting.
But does that also mean like you end up doing less coverage because you're not covering your ass? They know what they want.
We did less coverage in A Star Is Born than you would normally do. I think if it was a regular director, we would have done more.
Interesting. Sure. So you had reminded me, and it was one of the ones that I meant to talk about, and I think it's important to talk about, is Straight Outta Compton, which to me tells...
Love that movie.
It tells a story that I couldn't believe no one had told it before. How important was NWA to you growing up?
I mean, as soon as I got out of high school, I was working at record stores, you know. Well, I heard the NWA record around the same time I heard Yo Bum Rush's Show from Public Enemy. And then I heard Fear of a Black Planet. And I was just like blown away. It was a revolution. So when I was in a New York hotel room and I had the TV on, it was Oprah. And she had Ice Cube on. And she said that, what's going on with this NWA movie? And I just turned around. I'm like, what? What NWA movie? So I literally called my agent right there. I'm watching Oprah, and I'm like, I call him. I was like, "Is there an NWA movie?" And he's like, "Yeah, there's an NWA movie. F. Gary Gray's doing it, and it's going to go to Atlanta and this, that, and the other." I was like, "I want a meeting." It's like, get me in the room. I want to talk. You know, and I've never ever done that. I've never chased a film before. So I chased this one, and I end up on Oscar Day. I forget what year it was. Obviously, the year before we shot the film. I'm sitting in his office, you know, it's Oscar Day. I'm like sneaking into Hollywood. He's at Sunset Gower, and he's got a wall of snapshots from the time. And each snapshot is indicative of the tone of the scene that in the film, based on the script. And I was like, I'm in, man. Like, yeah, I just wanted to do it. And at the time, they were hemming and hawing about making it in Atlanta versus LA. And I'm just like, how could you possibly make this movie in Atlanta?
I know that seemed, when you said that before, I'm like, did I make that in Atlanta? I mean, like,
I've been to Atlanta. That'd be a stretch.
yeah, it would be a little complicated.
That'd be complicated, but you know, long story short, we ended up shooting it here. And it was. I remember reading the script, and I'm like, this is a superhero movie. You know, it's not.
Kind of is. It's definitely an origin story for sure.
It's an origin story. It's a superhero movie. It's not a. It's not Cash. It's not your typical biopic. First of all, it's about a collection of guys, and they kind of all have equal value. At least three of them had equal value. Yeah. And so it ceases to be, you know, a story about James Brown. You know? Yeah. It's literally the makings of a superhero called Ice Cube, a superhero called Dr. Dre, and a superhero called Eazy. Right? Mm-hmm. And then there's MC Ren and Yellow. You know, it's sort of like Do the Right Thing. Working with Spike and having Do the Right Thing be an inspiration to me, making Straight Outta Compton was it had the same importance to me because it came from my upbringing in popular culture.
Yeah, it's a generation-defining album and band. You know, yeah. I mean, it'd be like making a movie about the making of Sgt. Pepper's or something. You know, it's right. So impactful in its own time. Yeah. So, having seen the movie, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm just curious what your point of view is. Like when you're doing something as a period piece like that, are you trying to make it look like it really looked at the time, or are you trying to make it feel like it really felt at the time?
Both. Mm-hmm. Both. I mean, some of the stage work we did, we worked really hard not to get too into modern lighting. You know, obviously we're in the midst actually of an LED revolution. It's already taken place and it's already superseded everything we've done and what we do. But when you do a stage show that's meant to be in the 80s, you got to really resist having to use LED, which we did, but we used them in the casings of a light, like a par can or, you know, something that would be representational. So I literally thought to myself, it's like when we were designing the stage lighting for Straight Outta Compton, it's like, what would Henry Rollins do? You know, like what, as simple as that. Like, okay, it was like if Rollins would do this, I'll do 10% more, 15% more than what Rollins would do. That's because that's what this band always meant to me. You know, Straight Outta Compton, NWA was like the hood version of Henry Rollins. You know?
That's interesting. Oh yeah, they definitely are. Yeah, I mean, they are as punk gets, really. And I always think it's interesting too, and I think the movie kind of brings this out, is that like music like that, because I'm a few years younger than you, but like my parents hated all the rap music that was coming out and were afraid of the messages in it. And I feel like that's almost the sign of the perfect transgressive musicianship, is when you create that, because those people aren't like, they're all just normal guys, but they figured out a way to be so provocative with their music that people were actually afraid of them. I mean, imagine being afraid of, I don't know, Yo-Yo Ma or something. It's like you're not going to, but people
only if his fucking staff was a sword.
The truth is, Yo-Yo Ma would fuck all of us up. Anyway, I think it's interesting because it humanized them in a way. Because like me personally, growing up in Florida, like that was music that was like kind of taboo. So of course I was drawn to it, but taboo for all the reasons you'd think it would be taboo in Florida as well. And South Central seemed like, a bazillion light years away, like another universe. And it was amazing seeing it kind of brought to life. Were you using any kind of vintagey lenses or anything to kind of evoke the way movies felt back then, or the way that their music videos felt, or anything like that?
It was the second movie I shot with the Red Dragons, and back during the Iron Man days, we tested the first version of it, and I hated how it didn't have the tonality to cover within the same scene a darker skin tone and a lighter skin tone. And then I shot, I remember going to a demo at the ASC about the dragon, and I could see, I was like, wow, this tonality is completely different. So I ended up testing it and shooting it in Brazil on a film about Pele. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with how they captured African-American tonality, and the differences between cool skin tones and warm skin tones. So I just, because I was getting used to the camera, I ended up using it on Compton, specifically because I really loved how it sort of rendered tonality that way. But I did want to dirty it up. I really, I was dead set on, I use Kawa sphericals primarily on the film, and then Zeiss super speeds. Mm-hmm. There's a scene with, I believe it was Ice Cube's first scene at when he's performing for the first time. And there's a flare there that I'm very particularly proud of, because I placed the light there specifically because I wanted to get the flare there for him. And, we used that. We also used Bethke filters, which was something out of Vantage Films. I think you guys are probably familiar with after going to Camera Image. They had these filters that you put in front of the lens, and then we built this thing called the Ring of Fire that we placed on rods outside of about maybe a foot off the matte box. And then we had 12 LEDs that would shine into this thing to create sort of a flare effect that we used every time we were introducing a new character. And we used it once for Eazy-E, we used it once for Dr. Dre, and we used it once for Ice Cube. And that was all in service to sort of the superhero part of it.
They got the glow.
Yeah, exactly right. And as a cinematographer, what you're doing is you're trying to root somebody within the world of your film, but you're also trying to accentuate the things that are important.
That's awesome. Matty, is there anything that I have missed or that you wish we would talk about, or a movie that...
I think we should save it till part 3, bro.
All right. So before we go, though, firstly, thank you so much for giving us all this time. I think we might turn this into a 2-parter. Before we go, obviously, if people want to see your work, they should first check out The Prom on Netflix right now. But do you have a website or a Instagram or something that you like to interact with people on?
I mean, I have an Instagram account that I'm on and off with, but that's basically all I have. I don't have Twitter anymore. Too toxic for me.
Yeah, it's pretty toxic.
But I still have my Instagram at Libatique.
Cool. Well, I hope everyone goes to check that out. I hope everyone goes to check out The Prom. And again, 1,000 thank yous for coming on board. You were one of the names that we probably floated as maybe we'll be lucky enough to get Matty Libatique on here one day when we started this. So it's an enormous pleasure to talk to you, and I just love your work.
I appreciate it, guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So that was Matty Libatique. What an amazing part 2. That was the second part of Matty Libatique, our final part of Matty Libatique for this round. Hopefully we'll get him back when he's got another exciting movie. In the meantime, everybody go check out Prom. It's on Netflix.
And now, short ends.
All right, so Ben, it's time for our famed short ends. You got a short end this week? Something that you're obsessing about?
Yes, I do, Ilya. It is a movie. It's not a podcast. It's not an HBO documentary this time. But here, as we're kind of hot and heavy in Oscar season, I thought I would distract everybody with an awesome horror movie that I saw last week on Shudder. So if you don't have Shudder, I talk about Shudder a lot on here. I think Shudder is an amazing online service, or like a streaming service, but for people like me who like lots of horror movies. So it's a new movie that dropped on Shudder called The Power. And I watched the trailer, and I can't tell you exactly why. When I watched the trailer, I was like, I don't know. And then Alicia and I, my wife and I, were kind of like trying to find something to watch. And I was like, let's give this 5 minutes. I don't know. Alicia responded more quickly to it. But it takes place in 1974, and it's about a nun who goes to work in a hospital. And I would say that it's like, it ends up being kind of part The Shining, part Jacob's Ladder. And it's it's a very fresh kind of a movie. I'm very interested to see what this director does. Her name is Karina Faith. I haven't seen any of her other films to my knowledge. I went and looked it up. And the DP is a woman named Laura Bellingham. And it looks amazing. It's really creepy. Like, it really sets an atmosphere. And when I say The Shining, I mean, like, that's high praise for me, because The Shining, to me is one of the crowning achievements in horror cinema. And The Shining had that weird feeling of like you're going down a long hotel corridor or whatever, and then seeing something you're not supposed to see in a room. And this kind of does that, but in a hospital. And basically in the story, this nun goes to work in this hospital. Something horrible has happened there. We're not really supposed to know what it is at first, and I don't want to spoil what it turns out to have been. But she's not to talk to any of the doctors. It's like early to mid 70s, kind of like very patriarchal England. And she's supposed to work in a very subservient way. And she talks to a doctor, and as punishment, she's forced to work all night, the overnight shift. And she's basically in a hospital outside of the patients and a few other people, basically alone. And there are blackouts going through that area. So giant corridors go totally dark from time to time. And it is so goddamn good. I just can't recommend it enough. I watched it last weekend, and I've been thinking about it every day.
Wow. All right. That's high praise. I'll check that out. I'm interested.
Do it. And if you don't feel like spending money to be a Shudder subscriber indefinitely, I believe you can always get a 30-day free trial. Check it out. If you like it, stick with it. It's not a terribly expensive service. But again, if you're not into horror movies, probably won't be your cup of tea. But I really thought this was brilliant. And my wife pointed out when it was over, and it hadn't really occurred to me that this was the case. It's like, it's a movie where pretty much all the main characters are women. The director's a woman. The DP's a woman. Like, most of the people who were behind it were women. And it has, I would say, kind of a subtly feminist message, but not in a way that felt like I was being preached at in any way. It's just a really well-told story, and I'm excited to see what all the people involved with this do next. The movie is The Power, and the director is Karina Faith. She is English. I think it's all an English production or a British production. But yeah, definitely check it out if you get a chance. And let me know what you think. Tweet at me or something. Tell me if you liked it.
My short end this week is also actually about something that is English. And this is going to be getting into the world of business here for a second, but there is sort of one large player in particular, publicly traded company in the technology sector of the motion picture industry that has a business model that's based around acquiring other companies. And that company is called the Vitec Group. The Vitec Group, based in the UK, owns most of the tripod manufacturers. They own Anton Bauer, probably the largest, most prevalent battery company. They own a lot of different brands, including on the LED lighting side. They own a company called Light Panels, which was really one of the first players in LED lighting. Well, today they actually acquired two more companies. One of them is sort of a streaming company, and there's details about that. It's called Lightstream, and they're involved in all kinds of things. And it was a very high dollar acquisition. It was $36 million almost that they acquired the company. And they also acquired a little company, well, this affects us directly. We do a lot of business with Vitek, but also we were one of the very first dealers ever for a company called Quasar Science. And Quasar Science makes these LED light tubes, and I know that they had a fairly really hard road initially, and it took them a while to catch on, but when they did, they started doing really well. And they're a really scrappy sort of independent venture. And, they got acquired or announced today for $6.1 million. And I think that's really great for them. I mean, congratulations. They were able to cash out and make some money in the process. But it's also going to be an interesting melding of the business philosophies of the companies, because very independent minded and now very corporate minded. And so it'll be interesting to me to see what happens. Quasar Science, interesting lights and lots of capabilities for RGB lighting and small lighting and inexpensive lighting, all kinds of cool stuff. And now essentially the 800-pound gorilla of the LED lighting space, you might say, because, actually probably not fair to say, because there's a bunch of other LED lighting companies that do really well. Big companies, of course, like Arri are involved in lighting. But the fact that Vitek identified this company, said that's what we want to add to our portfolio, and did, it could be a really good thing actually for both businesses coming together. We'll have to see what happens, but Vitek, has like 1,600 employees across 11 countries, and Quasar Science has only been around a few years, and it's like 18 people, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens now in this new world and what sort of stuff that they work on. Light panels make some really cool lights. Quasar Science makes cool lights. I think that maybe we'll see all this stuff sort of merge together, and I don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, do you have an inside track? Like, do you talk to people who work at Quasar Science, or the people who own Quasar Science? I'm just curious if you can find out, like, do they become part of the Borg collective now, or are they basically being bought out and financed but left to do their thing in some way?
I can tell you that there's a playbook that Vitek generally seems to follow, and the key people, the partners, four of the partners of Quasar Science sound like they're sticking around, at least according to the press release I saw. And I do know the people, and I do have conversations with them, and I'm on the LED lighting tech committee for the ASC, and all the players for all the different manufacturers are part of that same committee. So back before COVID, we'd see each other on a regular basis. But yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen, except, usually the companies kind of the Vitek lets the companies kind of continue to run and do their thing for a while. And then eventually that kind of all gets absorbed and brought inside of the Vitec Group. CSLA, Creative Solutions division of Vitec Group, includes companies like Small HD and Wooden Camera and Teradek. All of them are in a division. Light Panels is their own division. And
I didn't know
Quasar
Small
HD
was part of Vitec too.
They were. Yeah, there they are. They were acquired. Wooden Camera was a fairly famous acquisition not too long ago. I think they paid out around $20 million for Wooden Camera.
Wow.
And I know, exactly. I think that's what everybody said. And the founder of the company just exited in the last year. So basically, usually what happens, people stick around for a while, and then they move on to other stuff.
Is there a master plan behind Vitek? Are they just...
I think they're the Borg. I think that they're going to, they're going to continue to identify companies. I mean, their growth model is to keep acquiring companies, it seems, and it's working out. You can buy them. They're trading, I think, at over 1,100 pounds a share or something like that. So
Whoa.
Yeah, if you would like to, yeah, they're a mighty empire, and if you still wanted to invest, you can buy them. They also owned, the list of companies is crazy, but like O'Connor, Sackler, Manfrotto. Yeah, they own a lot of brands. Yeah.
And why keep all those brands separate at that point? I mean,
they they established their own following. They kind of serve different markets, but now manufacturing for all those like tripod brands, they all take place in Costa Rica. So it's like Costa Rica, like they've got a factory, I'm pretty sure, or a series of factories that are building O'Connor, Sackler, and Manfrotto. They're all coming out of there. So.
Wow. That's very interesting. Yeah, I didn't know any of that. You just blew my mind a little bit.
It's kind of opaque. They don't, you can, if you look around or if you're in the industry or you pay attention, you can see like, oh yeah, the power and reach of, some of the players here. And the Vitek is one of the largest and does tend to acquire, companies on the regular. It seems like annually it's like, oh, we're going to increase our holdings in this space. And then, there's usually some sort of performance-based payout that happens to the people behind that. They want to make sure that they've acquired a company that continues to do well, so they usually pay them some cash, and then depending on how they do, they make more money, and then who knows? We don't know. It's we'll see what happens.
The big question is, what are you going to do when they come for hot rod cameras?
I don't think there's much of a chance of that. We're their customer. We buy from them. So it's we buy their stuff and sell it. They don't play in our space per se. They're not really looking to acquire people who sell their products and stuff like that. So I seriously doubt they're going to come knocking. So
we'll see about that.
Anyway, so Ben, I think that just about does it for this episode. Where can people find you?
Please go to benrockonline.com and you can see some of my directing work. You can find all my social media stuff, read my blog, which I've kind of left fallow for probably 5 or 6 years at least. I don't know, probably more.
So they can go and look at that same blog post from 6 years ago.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. I haven't revised it, but more importantly, you can find links to the Cinematography podcast on that website. So,
nice.
Yeah. How about you, Ilya? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm really inspired now. I think I'm going to write something for your blog, just so.
Do it. You can be my guest blogger.
Find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. If you come into the store, we are open again, very COVID friendly. Well, I should say COVID friendly, COVID unfriendly. We're very social distance friendly, and
get out
all the CDC. Yes,
strike thee down, COVID.
But if you come into the shop and you mention that you listen to the podcast, someone will slap a T-shirt in your hand. That's what we do. We want people to have Hot Rod
socially
Cameras
distanced.
swag.
Like you use one of those nifty nabber things where you makes you 4 feet longer on each arm.
It's a T-shirt cannon is really what we're using. We're just blasting it.
You'll get in that thing that Sigourney Weaver drove around in Aliens, and you'll use that to hand them a T-shirt.
We got a good system. You will see a surprising amount of translucent plexiglass barriers and things like that, and everyone has their own station, and thankfully it's like a 7,000 square foot building, and everyone's kind of got about 1,000 square feet to themselves. Everyone's kind of got maybe not quite that much, but they got a few hundred square feet to themselves.
I'm looking forward to seeing it myself because I haven't been there since COVID started, but you've got your first vaccine and I'm getting my second one next week, so probably in under a month we can be doing this in the same room again like we used to.
You haven't even seen the theater, which is also sounds fantastic. We should record an episode in there. It'll be fun.
I'm happy to do it. I love that theater. I think it's a great space. I think we should move the whole podcast operation into that theater.
All right. Done and done. Okay, Ben, I think that just about does it for this episode. Let's thank some people.
Yeah, absolutely. First out of the gate, we must thank Alana Cody, our intrepid, amazing producer, who tirelessly works to get us some of these amazing interviews. We have some great ones coming up. And again, I can't stop doing a victory lap that we got to have Matty Libatique on the show.
Again, yes, absolutely. Let's also thank Kay Zalatrachi, who's not listening, but still, totally deserving of our thanks for all the wonderful work he did making all the music that you heard on this podcast.
And lastly, we want to thank birthday boy Ben Katz, who I believe it is his birthday as we are recording today. Ben Katz, who makes us sound less idiotic than we are by some percentage.
Happy birthday, Ben Katz. Now get back to work. Edit. Snip, snip, snip. Chop, chop, chop.
All right, well, that about does it. We will see you next week here at the Cinematography Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.